David Liggett with Data Center Hawk, focused on cloud and co-location, data center industry trends, and dynamic market. I'm David Liggett with Data Center Hawk, and this is Hawk Talk 43 with the one and only Anthony Bolner, Executive Vice President and Partner with Stream Data Centers. Anthony, welcome to Hawk Talk 43 from our homes.
Thank you, David Liggett. Yes, from our homes. What an interesting time in not only the world, but also in the data center industry. So here we are.
Yep, absolutely. So for those of you watching that do not know, Anthony was gracious enough to be the first guest we ever had on our Hawk Talk video discussion. So this is Hawk Talk number 1, and that was in our office. We also met for Hawk Talk 37, which Anthony, you might have forgotten about, but I didn't, in Montreal, and highlighted some data center happenings in that market. And here we are from our homes in Dallas, but excited to get to catch up with you and get to hear about Stream and what you all are doing. And we're also going to talk about the Dallas market. So one of the really fun things that we're doing right now from a Data Center Hawk perspective is highlighting the major markets in the United States and how they have been growing over the past year. And so Anthony, obviously Stream is focused on markets all across the U.S., but you've spent a significant amount of time in Dallas, and so we're going to talk about that in a minute. But before we do, obviously this is a very unique time, challenging, related to the COVID-19 things that are happening. And so just how has Stream Data Centers worked to get through this time and continue to operate effectively?
Sure. Well, it has been interesting, and I think we've all weighed heavily on our processes and our procedures. And Stream Data Centers, we obviously operate, critical facilities right now, and there's a lot that goes into that. In addition to that, we have 2 major construction projects underway right now, one in Chicago and one in Phoenix. And both of those have continued to run smoothly through, this time, but an awful lot of coordinating and following processes and procedures has gone into keeping those projects underway.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Chicago and Phoenix. One of the projects that you recently delivered was a project actually here in Dallas, and that's what we're going to spend the majority of our time talking about today, as we, from a Data Center Hawk standpoint, really look at how different markets have ebbed and flowed from a growth standpoint. In the data center industry, if you track our content, we talk a lot about absorption, which is just a fancy word to measure the demand in a market. And so, you've been in this market for a long time, specifically Dallas. You know how it's grown. And so I'd love to ask you some questions about, how the market has changed over the past several years. And we're going to dive right in. And specifically, I want to talk about some of the numbers behind the data center market. So Data Center Hawk, we're numbers junkies. We track statistical data around how markets are changing. So the Dallas data center market, according to our statistics, is 390 megawatts of multi-tenant co-location, power. This is spread across the Dallas-Fort Worth area in different geographies. It traditionally has a vacancy rate that ebbs and flows between 11 and 14%. Right now, we're on the higher side of that. The market sees anywhere from 30 to 40 megawatts of absorption or demand per year, typically. And that ebbs and flows based off of user demand. But, what have you seen, perhaps change from a Dallas data center market perspective over the past several years?
Sure. So historically, Dallas has always been one of the very best enterprise data center markets in the country. And Dallas has always had, very strong enterprise demand. Over the last really 2 or 3 years, we have finally started to see some good hyperscale, large technology, and even cloud services enter the Dallas market. Still, certainly not the same scale that we've seen in other major hyperscale markets like Northern Virginia. What we have seen, though, and it doesn't necessarily show up in your multi-tenant numbers, it doesn't necessarily, show up even sometimes in the absorption numbers, but we have some major hyperscale and cloud providers, uh, buy land and build, big data centers in the Dallas market, and a lot of that doesn't necessarily change the numbers, when those campuses or large facilities, hit the market. But I do think it is an underpinning of future growth.
Yeah.
Because having those big users in the market, not to get ahead of ourselves, but I think that is the beginning of Dallas becoming a major hyperscale market, even though the providers in this market haven't necessarily seen cloud guys coming into this market.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the trends that we've seen, specifically taken from hyperscale data center users over the past 3 to 5 years, is really a dual strategy where they are going into markets and finding land and buying that land and then building, owning, and operating data center facilities themselves. And we're talking 20, 50, even 100 megawatts in some markets. And then we're also seeing, which has been a massive shift, probably 3 or 4 years ago, those companies leasing those type of numbers from, data center operators. And to your point, that is really the first thing that begins to happen is when you see them come into a market, is them taking some owned positions in land and facilities, and then other demand comes from that. And I think those that are looking at Dallas certainly believe that the market's positioned well to handle, that demand with the ease of development and some of the tax incentives that are here and stuff like that. But talk about why and maybe some of the reasons that you've seen data center users choose the Dallas market, and why this market, compares well when it's set next to other markets across the U.S.
I think a lot of it just comes down to cost of doing business, ease of development, cost of electricity. I mean, the cost of electricity in the Dallas market today is under 4.5 cents per kilowatt hour. If you're diligent and doing your contracting correctly, and I will tell you, dominant provider in North Texas and in Texas is Encore. And to Encore's credit, they are a deregulated utility provider, and they do have really good paths to renewable resources and renewable power purchasing agreements. So which has become important to a lot of these big hyperscale and cloud guys. So I think the underlying utility story here is very important. I think the cost of living, I think the cost of land, I think the availability of land, I think even things like our major transportation hubs and our just ease of doing business in, I'd call it the state of Texas, but really North Texas in particular, have all been a really important facts as to why Dallas has continued to grow as a data center market.
Yeah, and to put your comment into perspective around the power, for those of you that are watching that don't know, 10 years ago in Dallas, the power cost was double, what Anthony mentioned. It was in the 7 to 8 cent range. And so to see it now where it has come, especially for users that have larger demand, that's a very attractive component of this area, and why data center users find it, to be a suitable home for whatever their needs are. Right. I say this as a compliment. You've been in this industry for over 20 plus years, and so you're a well-tenured mind when it comes to these type of questions. But kind of give a brief history about the geography of Dallas and how you've seen the data center market grow over the last 10 to 20 years.
Sure. So I think 10 years ago, and probably even more so 20 years ago, you know, Dallas data center market really centered around the carrier hotels and the connectivity hubs. Over the last 10 years, as co-location has become much more efficient, and the deal size has gotten so much larger, developers and operators have found suburban sites, built large dark fiber loops, been able to deliver much more efficient functional space and larger footprints. So it's it has become a suburban development game, no question. Larger sites, bigger floor plates, all that. Now that we're seeing the hyperscale and cloud guys come in over the last 2 to 3 years, call it, I think those connectivity hubs are still very important, because I think, if you look at where so much of the traffic runs in and out of Dallas or in and out of Chicago, or, we can all still identify those key carrier hotels. But I do think that a lot of these larger hyperscale users are, in a lot of ways, creating their own large dark fiber paths, between their own facilities a lot of times. And I do think that providers are building data centers oftentimes, playing off of, or kind of with mindset of where the big guys are. So it's certainly become everyone's looking for larger sites. And I would just say in general, kind of more suburban and more functional sites.
Definitely the campus idea and growth, like long-term growth, and being able to show, hey, we can not only put, one building on this, site that's 32 or 36 megawatts, but we can put 5 buildings on this, 100 acres that is, and we can do it over a period of, 5 years. So I think
you hit on 2 key things right there, Dave: scale and timing. And scale and timing are so important, especially to the big guys. And you can sometimes, these larger data center deals are referred to as a build-to-suit, but the truth is there was so much work done before the build-to-suit was, before you even had an opportunity to chase it as a build-to-suit. The land had to be purchased, and the utility substation maybe was started, and then suddenly, oh, it's a build-to-suit, and Mission data center space shows up in 10 to 12 months. But believe me, somebody's been working on that for 2 to 3 years.
Wow. Yeah. So talk about, actually, when I think about Dallas too, I think about some of the clusters that we have from a geography perspective. This is, one of the trends that we see really all across the world is, there's some key clusters where data center either providers or users find value in infrastructure that, you've got power, the connectivity infrastructure. So we've certainly seen that in Dallas. And as you mentioned, it going from kind of downtown Dallas into the suburbs in areas like Richardson and far north Dallas, Plano. We've seen some of that in Alliance. We've now actually seen some of that in the Garland area, where you all have your latest site. But talk about, I would love for you to just highlight the cluster mentality, and then also talk about what you're doing in Garland. I mean, you all have delivered your site there, and talk about kind of the long-term plans of that site.
So in Garland, we delivered 3 megawatts of critical load in a data center that's really designed at 15 megawatts. It's a 22-acre campus, brand new on-site substation that gives us transmission rate pricing, which is, aggressive even in this market. But we have another 10 to 12 acres of land to develop there. And on that land, we've done a 30 to 40 megawatt design. I mean, it still could be another 15 megawatt data center, but with the scale of some of the things that we're seeing in the market today, we're starting to see 2-story designs here in Dallas, which would have been unheard of 2 years ago. But we're seeing 3-story designs, and I'm sure larger in Northern Virginia, and we've even seen some 4- and 5-story designs in Silicon Valley. So it's taking advantage of a good location that has a really good power story, good connectivity. Uh, to your point about micro markets or clusters, as you call them, it that's a very real phenomenon, and we're all out chasing utility power. We're chasing, you know, uh, good proximity to fiber and connectivity. And the truth is, we're in a lot of ways we're also chasing good proximity to the major users in the market. So it's all logical stuff, but timing, scale are two of the really important things that I think everybody's focused on.
Yeah, what do you think will be the key indicators of a market like Dallas moving forward? What will, what are the most important things that can happen to attract both an increased demand from the enterprise user as well as activity from really large users that want to grow and need to grow fast?
It's interesting, and we probably talked about this in the past. We probably talked about this more with regards to like a Northern Virginia market, but it's almost the supply phenomenon, and does absorption bring supply, or does supply bring absorption? Well, I think in this, in this business, in a lot of ways, supply does bring absorption. And I do think that, you mentioned it earlier, that the supply side of the market has probably, grown a bit here in Dallas, maybe from 11% to 14%. The truth is, I think a lot of these larger users see Dallas as a market that has really good supply opportunities in it. And I think, with aggressive utility rate pricing and also good underlying economics of space available. So maybe we can coin a new phrase. I think there's a little bit of a supply side phenomenon going on here, where we're going to get looks just because of what's here. Not to mention the demographics of North Texas and the Dallas market. I think there's a lot of questions going on. When you see some of the outpost type locations that some of the cloud guys have built, why wouldn't would you rather do that in a major metro area like Dallas, where you could also have, compute that's closer to eyeballs and, and basically the end users?
Yeah, and you've got, I think, in Dallas, an area where growth is logistically, I want to say, I use this word lightly, but easier, because I know that it's never easy to develop a data center campus or go through all of the things that it takes to do that. But I do know in other locations across the U.S. and even across the world, a tight real estate market creates some really hard challenges when you're trying to figure out, hey, how can we put multiple parcels together to get to that 50 acres, 7,500 acres that it takes today to show scale and growth over a long period of time. There can be permitting and environmental challenges in certain markets. So I think one of the advantages of a market like Dallas is that there's somewhat of an easier path here. I think for me and for us at Data Center Hawk, I think we're really excited about Dallas this year, given, a couple of things. One, the competition that's here, and I mean that in a good way, are, sure, it is top of the line as it relates to data center operators that are mature here, can grow long term, can scale up very quickly. So from that perspective, we think there's a large pathway to growth. Number two, your point, the economics are, number one, the rental rates are extremely competitive. The power cost is top few in the nation. I mean, it's a very competitive power cost, and just the area makes sense from a logistical perspective as you think about the U.S. And there are logistical challenges that come with where you locate your data center, and you can build a data center anywhere. It just costs you time and costs you money. And so putting a location in areas where labor is extremely competitive and available, cost is strong. I mean, those type of characteristics typically lead to growth. And your comment about the supply being here, it is ripe for growth from our perspective. And we certainly are bullish about what the growth will be in 2020. It'll be fun to watch. Before we turn the page, I just want to talk about how the data center user has matured over the past 5 years. And one thing we talked about was connectivity and just network. And never before have we seen the importance of that than the world we're living in right now. Specifically with people working from home, and that was we were seeing that trend years ago, but now it's extremely important. Talk about that and talk about how that impacts physical location of a data center, as well as how data center users think about their facility that they will actually go into.
Well, I just think we are just starting to understand the impact of COVID-19 and our reliance on the digital world that we live in. I think we've all become much more used to and comfortable with these video conferences.
Yeah, we're pros.
That we all spend almost all day on now, and it'll be interesting really to see how it changes the way we all work over the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years. So I think we're all fortunate to be in the data center business, and there's just no way that this can't affect our business in a strange positive way, just purely because of demand. We certainly haven't seen it yet, or we haven't got our arms around it yet, but I'm very interested to just track, keep an eye on this, even the next 60 to 90 to days to 6 months. I think we're going to see real impacts in the very near future.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think we'll all look back on this time and, years from now and be able to pinpoint these were the things that fundamentally changed. Not, and it's a data center issue, but it's also a life issue. I mean, there's some key things changing for, people's lives all across the world. This is not just obviously a Dallas, Texas, U.S., North America. I mean, this is a world challenge that we're all in the middle of, and but with those challenges, I mean, create time periods of, on the backside, extreme growth and things that happen during those time periods that stick. And that's, what will the sticking points be, I think is what we're really paying attention to and trying to focus on. And that will dramatically impact the data center industry and certainly here in Dallas. So, well, hey, this, but I want to thank you for taking the time to connect with us today. Just as a brief note for those that don't know, tell everyone just about the market Stream is active in and what y'all will be planning on for 2020.
Well, Stream, we talked about Garland. We do have available product in Garland here in the Dallas market. We are under construction on 3 megs in Chicago in Elk Grove Village in a building that'll scale to 15. We're under construction on 4.5 megawatts on a campus in Phoenix that will scale to 200 megawatts. So that's really kind of a new adventure for Stream. That's very much larger than other things we've worked on. We still have product in San Antonio, in Houston, and in Minneapolis, and then we are working on some things in Northern Virginia, Chantilly in particular. So, we're just trying to keep our eyes open wide and see what's out there that we can execute.
Well, awesome. Well, Anthony, thanks for joining us. Look forward to catching up with you on the next time.
Thank you, David Leggett. Take care.